There are chapters of history so dark that governments spend decades trying to erase them. What you are about to hear is not fiction. It is not a conspiracy theory. It is documented, verified, and for many years, deliberately hidden from the world. This is the true story of Unit 731. In 1932, the Imperial Japanese Army moved into Manchuria in northeastern China. On the surface, what they were building looked like a routine military installation, a water purification unit, nothing that would draw attention from the outside world. But the truth of what was happening inside those walls was something else entirely. The facility was enormous, a sprawling complex of more than 150 buildings spread across 6 square kilometers. It had its own railway line, its own airstrip, its own prison. At its peak, it employed more than 3,000 scientists, researchers, doctors, and military personnel. From the outside, it looked like any other military compound. From the inside, it was something the world had never seen before. It was led by a Japanese physician and army general named Shiro Ishii. Ishii was brilliant, ambitious, and completely without moral limits. He had become convinced that biological warfare was the future of military power, and he was determined to develop it, no matter the cost. Behind those gates, under his direction, the cost would be measured in human lives. The guards at the gate were under strict orders. Nobody spoke about what happened inside. The prisoners brought to Unit 731 were referred to by the staff not as people, but as logs. It was a deliberate dehumanization, a way of making the unthinkable easier to carry out day after day. The laboratories inside were cold, sterile, and methodical. Everything was documented. Everything was recorded. Scientists in white coats moved between metal tables, taking notes, running tests, and treating the human beings in front of them as nothing more than data points to be measured and observed. The prison corridors stretched long and dark. Iron doors lined every wall. Prisoners were held in small cells, waiting. Most of them had no idea what was coming. They had been told they were being taken somewhere safe, somewhere away from the war. None of them knew what waited for them at the end of that long corridor. They came from across Asia: Chinese civilians, Korean laborers, Russian prisoners of war, men, women, and in some cases children. All of them brought in by railway, surrounded by guards, and processed like cargo. The staff called them logs, and like logs, they were consumed. The records that survive tell a story that is almost impossible to comprehend. Thousands of pages of notes, observations, and results. Clinical language describing acts of unimaginable cruelty. Experiments conducted on living human beings with the same detachment a scientist might apply to a laboratory animal. Every page stamped classified, every finding locked away. Frostbite experiments were among the most documented. Prisoners were forced outside in freezing temperatures, or had their limbs submerged in barrels of ice water. Researchers stood nearby with clipboards, recording at what point sensation was lost, at what point the skin began to die, at what point the damage became irreversible. No treatment was given. The point was to observe. Other experiments took place in rooms like this. Surgeries performed without anesthetic, not because none was available, but because researchers wanted to observe how the body responded to trauma without pharmaceutical interference. Pressure experiments tested how much the human body could endure before organs failed. And when a prisoner died or became too weak to be of use, they were removed and replaced. The guards in the towers watched the perimeter around the clock. Nobody escaped. Nobody was released. The only way out of Unit 731 was in pieces, disposed of in the surrounding land, or burned in the facility's own crematorium. The searchlights swept through the fog every night, illuminating nothing but empty ground and silence. But the reach of Unit 731 extended far beyond its walls. Across flat farmland and quiet villages in China, ordinary people were living ordinary lives. They had no idea that what was being developed inside that distant compound was already being aimed at them. Planes carrying biological weapons flew low over Chinese villages. Bombs filled with plague-infected fleas were dropped over civilian populations. Water supplies were contaminated with cholera and typhoid. Anthrax was released into farming communities. It is estimated that these field operations resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Chinese civilians. Not soldiers. Civilians. After the attacks, villages fell silent. Streets that had been full of life stood empty. Doors hung open. The scale of what had been unleashed was almost impossible to measure, because there were no survivors left to count. When the war began to turn against Japan, orders came down from the top. Destroy everything. Burn the records. Leave nothing behind that could connect the Imperial Army to what had been done inside those walls. Staff worked through the night, feeding documents into fires, watching years of classified research turn to ash. Buildings were demolished, equipment was destroyed. The physical evidence of Unit 731 was systematically erased, building by building, room by room. The goal was simple. If there was nothing left to find, there was nothing left to answer for. Shiro Ishii fled. He moved quickly and quietly back into Japan, leaving Manchuria behind him. He had spent years building the most advanced biological warfare program in history. Now he was just another man walking through a dark city, trying to disappear before anyone came looking. They came anyway. Soviet forces advanced into Manchuria in August 1945, moving fast across the flat landscape. But by the time they arrived at the site of Unit 731, most of it was already gone. Rubble, ash, and silence. American intelligence officers had already been briefed. They knew what Unit 731 had been. They knew what Ishii had done. And inside quiet offices far from Manchuria, a decision was being made about what to do with that knowledge. The deal that followed has never been fully acknowledged by either government. In exchange for the biological warfare research data that Ishii's team had gathered over years of human experimentation, the United States granted full immunity from prosecution to Shiro Ishii and the entire Unit 731 staff. The data was considered too valuable to hand over to the Soviets. The men who had gathered it were considered too useful to imprison. While Nazi doctors were being prosecuted at Nuremberg for crimes against humanity, the men of Unit 731 were quietly returning to civilian life in Japan. The same courtrooms that sentenced others to death for similar acts never heard a single name from Unit 731. Not one charge was ever filed. They walked out into the sunlight as free men. Some became respected doctors. Some became professors at major universities. Some went on to lead some of Japan's most prestigious medical institutions. The men who had spent years conducting experiments on living human beings simply resumed their careers, their freedom fully protected by the governments that knew exactly what they had done. Some of them stood in lecture halls like this one, teaching the next generation of Japanese physicians. Their students had no idea what their professors had done during the war. The knowledge stayed buried, protected by silence, by immunity agreements, and by governments that found it more convenient to forget. Shiro Ishii died of throat cancer in 1959. He died in his own bed, in his own home, surrounded by family. He was never arrested, never charged, never tried, never imprisoned. He died a free man and took most of what he knew with him. For decades, the Japanese government said nothing. Official denial, official silence. The site in Manchuria was gone. The records were ash, and the men who had been there were protected by agreements that nobody was ready to make public. It would take more than 50 years before any of it was officially acknowledged. Today, a museum stands on the site of Unit 731 in Pingfang, Manchuria. Visitors come from across China and the world to walk through what remains of the complex, to stand where the buildings once stood, to see what was left behind, to remember what was almost erased completely. Inside, some of the original cells still stand, small, dark, and cold. Visitors look through the iron bars at the space inside and try to imagine what it was like to be held there, waiting, with no understanding of what was coming and no way out. The railway tracks that once carried prisoners into the compound are still there, overgrown now, rusting. The weeds have grown up between the ties and the fog still rolls across the ground on cold mornings, just as it did then. The tracks lead toward the old gate and stop. Nobody comes or goes on them anymore.